Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started. And as people come in, they can jump right in with us. First, I just want to welcome you here today. And I'd like to thank Bruce for being part of this workshop. He's going to be presenting, as you know, on ag labor. And this is part of a series that we've designed to celebrate our 40th anniversary. Tomorrow, Mark Hermanstadt will be joining us for a two-part workshop on water law and irrigation systems in the Grand Valley. And then next Thursday, December 10th, we will be celebrating this milestone year with a little celebration to include music, photo art show of conserved lands, and a toast. We will be having refreshments available for pickup or delivery, so we will be getting messages out to people early next week regarding that. And you can go to our website for more information on that. Right now, Bruce has asked that we leave mics open so that you can informally ask questions if you need to. So feel free to unmute yourself, but please stay muted just in case there's background noise. At the end, we will also take additional questions. Bruce, as you probably know, is a fifth-generation Palisade farmer and the son of Harry and Bonnie Talbott, who are among the Land Trust founders who began working all of this in 1980. Bruce's title is farm manager for Talbott Farms Mountain Gold, and the Talbott family grows peaches, wine grapes, and they manufacture apple cider. In recent years, Bruce's son Charles led the family into the hard cider business, and today they have a lovely rustic farm market and tap room open to the public. Bruce knows the ins and outs of agricultural labor, and 2 years ago, Bruce published a letter in the Washington Post that was titled, "Our fruit is rotting on the trees as laborers are kept out of the country." I will put a link in the chat box for you so you can see that. And then Bruce has another article that will also appear in the chat box, and you can link to that. Without further ado, I'd like to thank Bruce again and let him tell you a little bit more about himself and begin his presentation on ag labor.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the interest in this topic. First of all, I'm a farmer, not a presenter. So just know that, and it's much easier to talk to a group in person when you can see responses and get a feel for where things are going and how they're being received. But with the time as we've got, we'll do the best we can. As far as what we are here, well, first of all, the reason for my interest in labor is that it makes up 80 to 85% of the operating cost of growing peaches, apples, cherries, and most of the fruits here. And so we live and die by the labor and cost, or the availability and cost of our labor. And if we don't have these guys, we're not going to do this anymore. We can't. So we absolutely have to have a good labor program. We're a grower, shipper, packer, processor is in technically what we are in the produce industry. We pack about 8 million pounds of peaches a year, except this last year, which was kind of skipped a year. We do about 600, 700 tons of wine grapes. We're increasing our cherries a little bit. We're dropping our pears because pears are predominantly for home canning, and there are very few people that do that anymore. So that's really not working well for us. When we started the Western movement, part of the Homestead Act was that everybody that wanted to homestead had to do certain things that made a bona fide farm. And part of that was you had to have livestock. Part of that was you had to grow vegetables. Part of that was you had to plant fruit trees. You had to plant grapes. So the entire West got planted with um, an array of stuff. Well, what is here today has to do with what areas succeeded. Most areas didn't do very well. And if it's for home use and you get a crop every other year, that's nice. It's better than not getting any. If it's for commercial, you've got to be really consistent. And so we've gravitated to certain places like Palisade that are, we have a niche here, and we are very consistent, relatively consistent. We're not as consistent as California by any means, producing fruit. And so it allows us to keep an industry here. In those, at the turn in the late 1800s, I'm going to say 90, at least 80%, possibly 90% of us were on the farm. By the Great Depression, we were still 50% of people were on the farm, and they were still diversified farms for the most part. My grandmother Talbott told me that the Great Depression happened, said we didn't notice. We didn't live any differently. Nobody had any money. We did street dances, and we caught fish in the river and pressure cooked them, and we got by fine, and we were as happy as anybody else. And but back in those times, you had a little bit of a lot of things, and your neighbors might come and help you harvest a little of this or harvest a little of that, and you had a lot more working back and forth. As we got into, well, and there was a culture of migrants, and mostly there was a West Coast route that started in California and Arizona and worked its way up to, as the crops progressed, worked north up into Washington and British Columbia. There was an East Coast migrant route that was Florida, Georgia, that worked its way up to, to New York and even Nova Scotia and British, or that East corridor. And then there was one that came up through Texas and worked its way up through Missouri into Michigan. And you had route, it was almost like migratory birds in how people moved. And they knew when the crops would be, they knew who needed help. And back then you were paid cash. You were, sometimes you were paid by the day, sometimes you were paid by the week, or you may have been piece rate, but you were paid. It was very easy to move from job to job. When we got into World War I was the first time that the country formally brought in outside help. And there was a 3-year period where and I didn't realize this until fairly recently, the Bracero program out of Mexico was run for 3 years. And the main thing that they were doing was railroads. And sorry, I didn't mute that before. Because when we sent too many of our guys to the war effort, we were short on people to run railroads. Well, just as soon as the war was over, the program was terminated because we really didn't need that many people. And there was some Hispanic, especially on the West Coast, presence, but mostly it was just Anglo migrants and Black migrants, and working their way back and forth. Once we got into World War II, and of course all through let me back up a little bit. So it's some migrants and a lot of people helping each other, almost all Americans. And we get into the Great Depression, and one of the really interesting things that happened here was that there were a lot of Midwest wheat growers, corn growers. Spring wheat was finished, and the kind of tradition or the pattern is a lot of Kansas and Oklahomans and Nebraskans would come to Colorado, and they would spend 2 weeks fishing in the mountains. And in August or early August, then they'd come down and do, harvest back then for standard Albertas. We were 90% standard Albertas. And at our peak, we sent 1.5 million bushels out of here a year, which was late 40s, early 50s. And it took about 5,000 people to harvest that crop. So Palisade went from 600 people to 5,000 people for 3 weeks, and then it went back. And it was a pretty dramatic time. But those guys would spend some time vacationing, and then they'd come down and do the harvest, which was a lot of 24-hour stuff. Those Midwesterners, Dad said, were the best guys that they've ever had work. They knew equipment, they knew hard work, they understood what had to happen, and it was a common culture. Well, we got into World War II, and which ended the Depression, and we had the same problem in that we pulled the majority of the men that were available out of the U.S. and put them in the military effort, either in actual part of the war or part of the building equipment support for the war effort. And again, the railroads there was nobody to run the railroads. So they brought up the second Bracero, brought up in 1941, 40,000 railroaders. And then later that year, they brought up the first ag workers under Bracero, which were sugar beets in Stockton, California. And it worked very, very well. And we have been dependent on south of the border labor ever since. Bracero, when the Second World War was over, there were a lot of people coming back, but we didn't have the same situation at the end of World War I. There was a lot more manufacturing. There was a lot more diverse economy. People were not coming back to agriculture. And so the Bracero program continued and provided an awful lot of the people in agriculture in the 40s and 50s. And Bracero was a Mexican program, or a U.S. program that formally brought in legal Mexican workers. And I think they may have had Jamaicans and some other countries as well, but predominantly it was Mexico. The other one that was very unique, though short-lived, was during World War II. We had the labor camp here in, the labor camp, we had that too, but we had the internment camp where we had German soldiers out of Rommel's North Africa Corps here, and they had, for 2 harvests, they picked peaches, and you'd call up the bait or the guys running the camp and how many guys you need, and they'd march them out, and they'd pick all day, and then they'd march them back in the evening. And Dad said, actually, they were a lot of fun because they were really happy because nobody was shooting at them here, and they really weren't a flight risk, and it was a very colorful time, but short-lived. And a lot of those guys, when the war was over, went ahead and stayed in the U.S. They didn't go home because in many cases they didn't have a home to go to. But over time then, the Bracero was a bigger and bigger part of what we did. And then in the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement show up, and anything out there, whether it's a marriage, whether it's parenting, whether it's a worker-employer relationship, are going to have bad actors. But that got Cesar Chavez and some of the efforts in California stigmatized the program to the point that the U.S. just said, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. Bracero's over. We don't have a program, which was the beginning of significant movement of illegal workers into the United States. And so now we're getting up to the times that I actually remember working with crews. It used to be a helicopter flew over or brown cars showed up, and everybody's going everywhere, and they're off into the river bottom. They're up onto the hills. They're, you may take a day or two to get your crew back when every time we had a raid from immigration. And the joke was that immigration put everybody on a bus, haul them to the border, dump them off, and the guys would beat the bus back to Palisade or to wherever they were working, and which was often correct. But what immigration was doing was just trying to make it an insecure labor force. So if you had other options, you were going to use other options, and it was just a threat that you were going to deal with at that time. That has There haven't been raids in a number of years. But in 1987 was when we did the first amnesty. And that was the climate then was we have an awful lot of people that are settled out and have been here for a long time and are the backbone of our agriculture. And so we went through the first immigration or amnesty. And the deal was we're going to legalize anybody that's been here for 3 years. And I don't know that it was limited to agriculture, but that was the part we were involved in. But anyhow, if you've been working here 3 years, we're going to legalize you if you go through the process. And so, and we're going to, the deal was we're going to get you a program that works. And so we won't be here again. Well, the program never happened. It never got through the Congress. So status quo continued. All of your replacement guys, well, an awful lot of your guys are legalized and move on to construction. They move on to service industries. They move on to other things and out of agriculture. And so you have new guys coming up that are working in agriculture. So in 93, we did the second amnesty, which was the SAW program. And again, but we'll fix it. We'll get you a legal immigration or a legal work program that is legitimate and is going to work. Well, that didn't happen again. And so here we're from 93, we're about 27 years later. We still don't have a program because what happened this time is agriculture says, you give us the program and we'll give you amnesty. You've done it. You have not fulfilled your promise twice. We don't believe you're ever going to do it. And so we will not support amnesty until you come up with something that works. And we're still there. And what we're doing, and I say that works, what we're doing right now is the H-2A program. And that is a legal document program, which is very expensive. It is very onerous. It has a lot of reasons not to be a part of it. But we've reached a point that if we don't have H-2A, we don't exist. Because there just is there's no other labor force. The H-2A, what we do in it, just to give you a feel for the requirements on H-2A, we are already applying for our guys for next year. We're already doing which will come in February. We are already doing our recruiting of locals we have to hire any eligible local person that could do the job. That recruitment's in process. Then once we are approved, once we have our people, you can, we pay their way from their house to the consulate. We pay per diem at the consulate. We pay for their papers. We pay for their trip from the consulate to here. We guarantee them a 3/4 of the contract period, which for us is 9 months. We provide them housing at no charge. We provide them transportation at no charge. We provide them utilities at no charge. And then when it's all over, we pay their way back down to wherever they live. So it's, and we pay adverse wage, which is $14.27 last year. This year, they're trying to stabilize this thing. So at this point, it's going to stay the same for this year and next year. We, in our own experience with H-2A, when we finally, Colorado would certify, we went in for 5 years, and it was the backbone of what we did. And it's how we had to operate. Then we got into in the Obama administration, there was a decision made by the Federal Department of Labor that they wanted to discourage the use of the program. And so they targeted H2A users for audits. We had a 6-week labor audit, and one of our auditors made the comment during the audit, you know, we spend enough time here, we're going to find something somewhere. But that was kind of the flavor of the audit. Toward the end of it, we did get a bunch of fines, and the rules had changed in February. We didn't know that. We hire somebody to keep us legal and make sure that we run the program correctly. And they didn't know that. They learned through our audit what those new rules were. So, but in the end, the auditors are telling us, okay, now go ahead and challenge this one. They'll back down on that one, and don't challenge that one. There's no point. And we're getting advice on how to minimize the pain from the people that are auditing us. So, but they also said the higher it gets, the more hostile it gets. You do not want to go up the chain of command toward the White House, because you're not going to get protected. Well, we decided we were too big a target. We dropped out of the program for 3 years. When we dropped out, most of our neighbors went in, mostly smaller growers. And the reason was we pretty much sucked up all of the available labor within at least a 10-mile radius. And there just weren't very many people out there. Well, after being out of the program for 3 years, we decided it doesn't really matter how big a target we are, because we're not getting fruit picked. This isn't working. And we scrimp by every year, but it was ugly. And so we went back into the program and have been in ever since. And hopefully we'll get a better program here at some point, but don't have it. The question is always thrown out there. They're unemployed in Denver. They're unemployed in Chicago. They're unemployed in many different areas, but I don't remember whether it was Boxer or Feinstein, but in California, they put together a program, since they're in proximity to the Central Valley, to try to move unemployed into fulfilling farm labor positions that were in the Central Valley. With a very big effort, I believe they got one guy to go to the Valley. Well, that experience, that history ended the perception by anybody that was involved in the topic that we are going to get the unemployed to come and do very onerous, difficult ag labor work on any extended period of time. And so there is, the political situation right now is there is generally a consensus that we need a program that is better. And what's a good program is one that treats the employer right. It treats, we'll give it a shot at video. It treats the employer well. It treats the employee well. And it's not onerous to work with, and it's not bureaucratic. And the measure of success is if everybody uses the legal program and there's no incentive to go around it, then you've got a good program. If everybody...
Bruce, I'm going to interrupt with a couple of related questions, if you don't mind.
And this has been a monologue, and I would prefer the questions, so go ahead.
Yeah. So I've got two. One, with all the cost involved with the H2A program, how do you calculate the profits of bringing these workers in? And then the second, related to that, what were some of the typical fines for audits?
Our situation on cost is we don't have any choice. When we're growing fruit, it takes years to grow orchards, and each year you have another crop, and at some point you may make the decision to not continue to grow something. And that is, the trend today is we're now a net produce importing country. We didn't used to be. As time goes on, we're producing less and less here. But it's every decision I make concerning labor is what's for the next 5 years, what's for the next 10 years. The life of an orchard's 20 years. And so I don't know if I'm answering that well. We calculate what it costs us. What we do is do everything we can to minimize the amount of labor necessary to grow a crop. And then we hope there's something left over. Unfortunately, we're also in a demand-driven market, and if there's too much fruit, we won't get we'll probably lose money. If there's a shortage of fruit, and if we do things well, we hopefully will make money. So so I guess it's the answer that's long term. It's not it's kind of trial by fire in the middle of the game and trying to nuance it to do a better job with labor and minimize costs. But the government sets the rate. We work with what we've got. As far as the fines that I think we were fined $80,000 or $90,000. One was for on a check stub, you've got to have a normal labor stub, you have all your deductions. Well, if you participate in H2A, you also need to have number of hours offered, number of hours worked. There's additional information that has to be on there. So that was one of the fines. Another fine was we interpreted H2A. Once you're in the program, every corresponding worker gets the same benefits as an H2A worker. So your labor costs or rates go up to whatever that new rate is. We interpret it as when we are delivered people, because that year the government was over a month late in getting people from when we contracted to when they actually got here. And but the rule is that it's when the contract exists and when they should have been here, not when they were here. So there was a month that we were fined for not having all the H2A stuff in line. We did not pay for their visas, which that was news to us that we were supposed to be reimbursing them for visas. We did not pay the original program. We paid their way from the consulate to here. The new program was you had to pay it from their home to there, so we got fined for not having done that. I haven't thought about this in a long time. But those are the ones I can think of right offhand.
Hey, Bruce, and a third question, what does H2A stand for?
I tell everybody H2A stands for agriculture and H2B stands for business. That's not really true. In the immigration or the visa code, there are A workers, B workers, C worker, D worker. And H just happens to be the paragraph that has agriculture. And H2A has more requirements, but does not have a cap. So we can bring in, they figure there's 1.1 million ag workers in the US right now, and a little over 250,000 of them are H2As. The H2B is what is used by the ski slopes. It's what's used by some of the recreational things. It's what's used by the landscapers. And it's got a lower set of requirements, but it's capped. And they release a certain number of visas. I think it's 50,000 visas in the first quarter and 50,000 visas in the third quarter. And I believe those visas are sucked up within a couple of hours because there's and people, one year they get a visa, the next year they're on their own. But it just happens to be where they're at. J workers, we used to have J workers in here, it's an education visa. So anybody that's coming to school here is on a J. for quite a while, there was a work and travel program supported by the Department of State. And the purpose of that program was to create goodwill and understanding. And basically, if you're a college student from any of the countries that are not considered flight risks, and you're graduating from college and a student in good standing in your home country, you can get a 4-month visa that allows you to legally work in the United States. And the idea is you come to the US and you work for 2 months, and then you travel for a month or two. And in the end, you get home broke, as all college students are. But you've had a heck of an experiences and it was paid for. So that was the reason for it. We used to use about 25 J workers in the shed here. And it was, they loved being here and we enjoyed them. And it's not an ag program. It's, most of them were in banking and in education and in, but they had a chance to come here. And we even had some of our guys go to Taiwan, which is one of our main source countries, to visit with the recruiters. And, it was quite a relationship. What happened though, is the Obama administration, there was a problem, I believe, at Hershey's in Pennsylvania. And they revamped the program and decided that agriculture, manufacturing, fisheries, there were 2 more of them, are not quality cultural experiences. Therefore, they're exempt from the program. And those that were left were basically service industries and recreational facilities. And all the people that we worked with were really sad to see the program go. The other thing we used to do is bring in J1s that were interns and coming off farms all over the world that, we had some great guys come in that they were farmers and they knew their stuff. But with the H-2A regulations and then the law that says we treat everybody the same, it means we're going to pay their way from wherever, and they have to qualify. And so because of H-2A, we've dropped our entire J1 program. So it's that we're not doing that anymore. I'd love to go back to it at some point, but we need some flexibility to be able to do that. Let me see. Back to current politics, just a comment I want to make real quick is that generally everybody in the federal government concurs or agrees that there needs to be a better solution if we're going to continue to farm in the United States. The problem with the last 2 rounds of an attempt at something is that, okay, we'll give you an ag program, but we want kudos or support for whatever interest we have. So it may be the Head Start program, it may be DACA, it may be, so, in the give and take, we'll give you ag if you give us what we want. The prices never worked. It's always been too much. And it's a question, do you do comprehensive immigration reform, or is it an ag program? There's 1.1 million people in ag. Let's say half of them are not legal, maybe a little more. So you're at 500,000. Well, there's 11 million illegals in the US right now, or 12 million. So ag is just a really small part of this entire discussion. And the other part of it, immigration reform, is how many, who are we bringing from what countries and for what reasons? That is a huge package. And agriculture is just a little thing off in the corner that's saying, hey guys, we need help. And in that bigger conversation, we're a pretty small part of the deal.
Bruce, I have a question.
Yes.
What would you see as I know that we're, that you're dependent on ag labor, and I wanted to see how you feel about the conserved lands that we are have preserved around here that are
Okay.
in
Yes.
our, that seem to be
We were
so
going to add
critical.
that. Let me say one more other thing first, because I'm going to forget it.
Okay, go right ahead.
We've got, well, on this, how this immigration is playing out is the East Coast wants a good program. The West Coast, which is California and has almost, well, over a third of all the ag workers, is much more concerned about legalization or stabilization of current workforce. And so the two sides of the country don't, agriculture doesn't agree right now. But the thing we've run into in California that we've never seen before in Arizona is ag used to all want to fix the problem. Today, you've got a lot of those companies that have over half or maybe all their production in Mexico now. And they've got a part still in Arizona or California, but they're not really very interested in fixing the ag problem anymore because they, or the labor problem, because they make more money if we can't grow things in the US. And so we've got big chunks of ag now. They're saying, you know what? Let's just keep farming in Mexico. We don't need to be up here. And that's been a little bit of a challenge that we have not faced before. In the picture, if we're going to invest in agriculture, perennial crops, it's all long-term investment. And we need a sense of stabilization. And what the easement, what the easement thing has done for us is create a stabilization factor. And easements allow us to transfer property at a little lower cost between concerned father to son, friend to friend. It's allowed us to protect with the IRS those transfers. That's helpful. It's discouraged the county commissioners when you got a bunch of eased ground, checkerboarded across a deal. That's not really going to be a city unless those are going to be parks someday. So that has caused the county to be much less aggressive in promoting, for lack of a better word, building and subdividing in our key ag things. So there's a finance, there's a stabilization. And when we're surrounded by houses and lots of traffic, it's hard to farm. People are not really excited about our wind machines at midnight to 5 in the morning in April that sound like you're in a heliport and chatter your windows, and it's we're kind of persona non grata. So the easements just help us with that stabilization and help us have less of a challenge with urban pressure. I mean, it's still there, but it's not what it would have been. In the when the Mesa County Land Conservancy at that time started, it was, you guys are nuts, and you can't stop this. There's not a chance. And it's amazing that it has gone from being a pariah to something that, well, the name's changed. You're all aware of all this history because Mesa County started taking credit for the fact that there was a conservancy and really had nothing to do with it. But so, yeah, it's important for us to have some stabilization here. We are very limited in the ground land base we have. And we farm a microclimate, and if we lose that, well, we cease to exist here as a peach industry, as a wine industry, as any other fruit industry.
Bruce, I brought up that because we did have a question here related to that. Any thoughts on the future of peach growing or agriculture in the valley? And then I've got another question related to worker programs.
My thoughts. If you're not an optimist, you shouldn't be in agriculture, or because you're not going to enjoy it. There's not a lot of security there. I think people will continue to want to eat. I think people will continue to appreciate things that are grown well and are like the Colorado peach. If we weren't special, we wouldn't be here. If we had to live on California prices for the last 25 years, we'd have lost this industry, conservancy or no conservancy. We have gotten a premium historically for the fruit grown here. And it allows us on a much smaller land base and with some higher costs of production to continue to survive and thrive. I encourage my kids to go into this. I think, what we have done, the nature has changed. There used to be, in the Western Colorado Hort Society, 200 or 300 members. Today there's 40 there's 50, 60 that are in ag. There's a lot of associate members, but we've consolidated down to a lot less people. With the cost of ground here, we have our own property that we manage, but we also have about 50 or 60 leases. And the reason, and most of them are long-term leases, a lot of them are orchard or vineyard establishment leases. The reason we do that is we can't afford to go out and buy all this $50,000, $60,000 ground per acre. The numbers don't work. But the people that have this ground, a lot of them have 2 jobs in town. They've got other careers. The 3 Achilles heels to doing this on your own are labor, equipment, and marketing. And you're going to have to take a month off work to go peddle peaches if you're going to do your own marketing. You're going to have to, there's a lot of things in there that just aren't reasonable. It's not the right word. They can make some money off of their ground and have it in fun crops and things that they're proud of growing, and have a place that's taken care of that they're proud of. And we become managers, property managers in the end, rather than landowners per se. 30 years ago, people would have told you were nuts. Are you going to put that much effort into somebody else's place? Go find something you can buy and control your investment. But with what it is today, that is what we've got to do. Well, with that nuance, saying that almost every major grower here is leasing a lot of what they're farming, I think there's a future. I'm looking forward to it, but it's, my brothers are, do you want to expand some more? I don't know this labor thing. We don't know what the government's going to do. The only solace I have is that every other producer in the United States deals with what we're dealing with. If we were isolated, then no, we probably wouldn't survive. But there will probably be less high-end crops, less fruit out there, but it's going to be a little more expensive. But I still think we're going to survive because we're good at what we do. What we do is special here. It's not just another commodity. So there was a second question, I think.
Yeah, we've got another question. If a new program is created, what changes would you like to see as being potentially beneficial for workers?
I think prevailing wage needs to be in there. I think the ability for a worker to work for multiple employers. Right now, it's not legal for an H-2A worker to work for anybody but us. Now, we turn around and lease something, that becomes us. But for me to help my neighbor, there's a long history of us helping each other out at various times in various ways. We got to be real careful doing that because it's really not legal. So a lot less lead time. There's another little nuance that you have to hire anybody that walks in the door that's eligible for the first half of the contract. But when you've already got your crew lined up and you're already set, you really don't want to hire more people. And recently that's not been an issue anyway, because there just isn't anybody out there that is wanting to come in even in the off season. But it does, and just a lot less bureaucracy. It should be simple enough that we currently hire somebody to manage the program for us. And it's not a big deal. It's $10,000 a year is what we pay them. Is that really necessary for filling out the paperwork and making sure that we get all things to the right people at the right time? We also deal with 4 federal agencies in order to get our people in here. Is that really necessary? The year or two ago, they Department of Labor just changed from certified letters to electronic communication as being okay for certification. It's like, guys, the rest of the world did this a long time ago. So some of it's just cleaning it
Yeah.
up, and some of it's just making it cleaner.
Bruce, Diana's got a question. What can ag land trusts and citizens who care about local ag do to help support an immigrant labor program? And she says writing letters, calling electeds, other thoughts.
I think writing letters and communicating with legislators is good, but not until there's something in the works. Right now, it would be lost in the storm. But if we do get some bills coming up, and I don't know that I've ever been in a time that we have ever been in a time in the U.S. where we are less confident or less sure of what the next year or two are going to be. We have no idea. And so will those opportunities show up or will they not show up? I don't know. But when the opportunities are there, we'd sure like to get support. The other thing is local support. When the Daily Sentinel says our peach crop froze, that means we have won because the community is taking ownership of the agriculture and has a relationship with the agriculture in our area. And if we can keep that relationship, our chances of benevolent law enforcement, benevolent legislation are just much higher. When somebody is, well, why do we want these guys around anyway? They're wind machines, they're sprayers, they're, I grew up in a culture that is highly dependent on our Hispanic farm workers. We had a company that we dealt with that was doing some high-end properties that wanted to make sure that none of the Hispanic workforce lived in the bunkhouses on the property until they'd sold their properties because they were afraid it would reduce the value. It's like, you want us to come in and clean you up and take care of you, but you don't want our people around. You guys are a little bit arrogant. And so, and it's just little nuances like that we want the community to want us to exist. And we want to be good citizens in the community. And, we'll have a grower here or there that does something that's like, why did you do that? But again, that's true of every occupation and every business class. Somebody's going to do something once in a while that you really wish they hadn't done that.
Well, Bruce, I thank you, and it's right a little bit after 1. I know some people may need to jump off. Do you have a few minutes for some live questions if anybody's got anything that they'd like to ask right now?
I would make one other comment real quick that
Okay, sure, please.
Is relevant to those pictures. We really are not much better labor-wise now than we were 100 years ago as far as what it takes to do things, with 2 exceptions. One is we don't do tall trees anymore. It makes no sense to go that high into the air. It's just too expensive, and guy or 2 falls off a ladder, it's just not worth it. We still use ladders, but we try to keep our trees short. The second thing is the forklift with a pallet and a bin took 1/3 of all the work out of produce. And that was the biggest improvement that we have ever, that as single change that has occurred in the fruit industry. And I'm really happy with bins and pallets.
Well, that's related to Nicole's question. What would you say is the most important action or event to happen and have the largest impact on the ag industry here?
That's the one I can think of right offhand. Everything else is little nuances here and there, but that one was, and we were boxes like the boxes you saw, the S.J. Miller Canning Company, which were tomato boxes originally. We had all conveyor belts. We conveyed it down into a cooler. We conveyed it up onto a packing line. We hand stacked. We had lift trucks or clamp trucks that would grab a stack at a time to move over to a truck, and you'd hand stack the truck or the train, whichever it was. But our packing house burnt down July 3rd, 1976. And I can only remember that because it's the day before the bicentennial. And that, though it took out our label stock, unfortunately, that was a different time. We bought ground we did not own. We built a packing house. We designed all the equipment and had it delivered and installed. We were packing 90 days after we burnt down in a new facility and a new property. And back then, nobody got in the way. Everybody was helpful. Everybody was a part of making it happen. Today, you could not get through the permitting process, the waits for power, the getting approval from building, I think even in an emergency, it's going to be a year before you could do something like that. But back then, it happened quick. But that also took us from boxes. The new packing shed was all bins and all pallets. And so it was, at the time, the biggest agricultural payout Farmers Union had ever made on an insurance claim, and it was 50% insured. So we lost a lot, but it launched us into the new era, which was far more efficient, and it would have taken us longer to get there otherwise. Not the way to do it. But there was a silver lining to that situation.
Yeah. Do you have time for 10 minutes of questions, Bruce?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Great. If anybody wants to unmute their mic, you're all able to ask Bruce a question or send us some more chat, and I'll get those questions to him. Sandy wanted to know how about irrigation systems? Is one preferred over another? What are the labor factors involved with irrigating?
Labor is not a whole lot different between furrow and sprinkler. But on sprinkler, you're doing it with a pay-per-click and an ATV. And so it's a little easier there. On furrow, you're using a shovel and you're moving gated pipe or whatever. So there's a lot more physical work involved. There's more erosion involved in furrow, and it depends just a lot on where the property is. What sprinklers have done for us is taken some properties, a property that lays really well is you don't have near the incentive to move it out of furrow into sprinkler. But a property that is undulating or inconsistent, I've got a property that irrigated 5 directions on 8 acres. And the guy that had it before us said, don't have anything to do with that property. You're never going to want anything to do with it because it's a nightmare to irrigate. We put it on sprinklers, and my guys that irrigate it don't know there was ever an issue there because it's as easy as anything else to irrigate. So it just depends on the property. Furrow is cheaper, doesn't require any power. Sprinkler does a little better job and it doesn't use less water agriculturally, but it diverts less water out of the canal system. So Orchard Mesa canals have never had as much water as they have now. And it's not because we're diverting anymore, it's because we've lined a lot of canals, and it's because the upper third is a high percent on sprinklers now, and we just don't pull as much water out of the canal.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Yep. No more questions?
I would make one other little comment that
Sure,
just
Bruce, go ahead.
observation. When I was a kid, most of our guys who were coming to work were between 20 and 35 years old. Today, our H2A guys are usually between 35 and 50. Part of what's going on in agriculture is the graying of the industry, like we have seen in most other areas of the U.S. economy. We have a graying problem too. And And Mexico is demographically changing. You know, they're now having 2 and 3 kids in a family, not 10 or 12. And when you have 2 or 3, you can afford to get them to college. Um, whereas if you have 12, they're on their own. They got to figure it out. And so what has happened is that there are less and less people that replacement workers out of Mexico. Uh, they're going to be going to other businesses, other industries. It's becoming very much Americanized. We can go further south, but at some point, I don't know. Who knows?
Right. I'm putting up the link for the other events, the other workshops we're having. Other folks have not registered for those, and for our celebration next week. I've included that in the chat box. Yeah, we've got a lot of thank yous, Bruce, and we can't tell you how much we appreciate what you do every day and what you've done for conservation in the Grand Valley and ag statewide. Your family has just been a tremendous force in agriculture. So thank you, and thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for the interest, and we're here trying to do the long game. So we love the support. So thank you.